Well, thank you for inviting me to come and give this talk since I'm on your
Committee.
And I think I was supposed to be the filler because it's July and August, and the Adult Education Committee is going to have the usual series of lectures that expand our mind throughout the year. But I'm going to start off, and I think the sermons that we had today were meaningful, and I was going to repeat much of what they said, but I think I'll get straight to the art talks now, because we certainly have been through a time of great challenge. And with those challenges that has isolated us and the other challenges that have divided us, makes us think that we have to think again about our spirituality. So what I'm going to share with you today is the spirituality and the thinking of many of the artists that I've had a chance to study for different reasons, because I knew some of them, because I was introduced to some of them, or I had connections with people who wrote about them. And so I'm going to share that with you today with the idea that you will think of the challenges that they went through, how they're like the challenges that you have gone through, and make you think again about what is the future for us and the next generation. So that is the theme of my talks today. And of course, those of you that want to, please think about what you want to paint to follow up on my talk for the future weeks. Just contact us at the Adult Education Committee. So here are the artists and their circle of life that I'm going to talk about as we look at and describe their challenges. And the question I'm trying to share with you is, do their paintings really engage and inspire you? And the ones that are in bold are the ones that I'm going to spend some time on. But and the bold are the different paintings that I want you to look at very carefully and decide as to whether you're engaged and whether you're inspired to think about different things. So then I will ask for your comments. And here's some of the readings that I had to use in order to figure out what many of these artists are trying to say. I'll be happy to send this to you for anybody. In that first slide, you saw my email address, which was all the UCLA professors have the first initial, their last name, at mednet.ucla.edu. So that's how you can talk to any of us. So I want to thank all the people that are in the audience, and you know who you are, that have helped me with this talk, because I've gone over some of the slides with different people, and they have made comments as to what we should do in this discussion. So I've received messages from families and friends and colleagues, particularly many of you here at the Westwood Presbyterian Church. And it made me think that to organize this, we have to think of three things. That is, where do you belong? And where do you not belong? And how do you extend that to everybody else that you know? What is your identity? Is it related to your birth and upbringing, your education, and your friends? And how much of it is personal? How much of it is spiritual? How much of it comes from professional associations? And then the second thing is learning. What are we? Learning. Now that we've been isolated with this pandemic, we have had the chance to remember. And we've had the chance to sit down and use all the media, the art, the literature, the science, and the things that are on emails to us. What have we learned from our companionship? Or the lack of the companionship? And then the final thing is, what now, if we know who we are, and we have tried to learn, what now are we going to pass on to the next generation? That's our gift. That's our responsibility. How do we teach the people that will be the next generation here? And I want to tell you, I'm a little prejudiced in this talk that I'm really a doctor, and here's my internship residency class. And I show you that I have no training in art or art history. I never took a course on that. And it's just from reading and talking to friends that I've been stimulated to talk about this. Some of these were very influential. This guy here, John Welton on the left, is introduced me to Edwina Sandy, who is one of the painters that I will show you today. This guy became dean of the med school at UC Davis. He was Philip Tumulty, that our leader, and all these people that are bolded down below are people that went into rheumatology, stimulated by Philip Tumulty. So I want to thank Phil for getting us started into thinking about patients and autoimmune diseases. I'm trying to use this appropriately. So the first painting that made me think about those three messages came from Paul Gauguin, because he did this painting that he called, "Where do we come from? What are we? And where are we going?" And that was done in 1898. And if you look at the painting, he starts here, the birth, and then what's happening, and then the death over here, symbolized by the idol there. That was his way of saying, with his primitivism, and remember, he was a very distraught man that left his wife and family to go out to Tahiti to try and find himself. So I'm not telling you he's a good representative of what you should be, but he started us thinking about those important questions in our life. So I will start with Peter Paul Rubens, because we are here at the Westwood Presbyterian Church, and I wanted to start with a religious theme that taught me, and so I want to share that with you. He was a Baroque artist, but he was also a diplomat, and he was religiously Catholic, and he, after the death of his wife, that was one of his challenges. He developed gout, and the gout was quite severe in those days because there was no good therapy at that time. But I want to leave a commercial saying that if you have gout now, we have good therapies. Go see the doctor. You should never have any difficulty with gout now, and you certainly shouldn't die of it. I have seen people die of gout as it affected their organs, but that's very rare. And the message is, what is his spirituality and his family that enabled him? So here are early paintings. He's the one that's second from the left, the young man there with this group of friends. And that was his second wife after his first wife died. And the poor guy, he was 53 years old. And in that generation, it was all right for him to marry a 16-year-old girl. And he finally had 5 children with her. Wow. The 5th one was born after he had died. So he had a lovely family life. That was part of his spirituality, right? But that's the painting I want you to think about. That's called the Entombment. Look at that. What do you see in that painting on the left? That's his self-portrait right before he dies. And you can tell as he looks out at you that he wants you to see what he's thinking, but he knows that these are his times. And he hides his hands so he doesn't show you the gout. What do you see on that painting on the left? And the reason I chose that painting, think about it. The reason I show that painting is because I read a review by Christopher Knight in the LA Times about it. And so as you're thinking about it, this is what he said. That's John the Evangelist with the three Marys in the background. Look at the profusely bleeding wound at Jesus' right side, which is at the center of the canvas, so that your eyes go right there. But what Christopher Knight was telling us is, look also at his mouth. He's bleeding from his mouth, and the blood is going down his right arm. And he interpreted that as saying, not only was he wounded, but we have to listen to what God has to say. And these kinds of paintings of the entombment make us think of our services of communion. And those of us that are Presbyterian, we celebrate that as all Christians do. But to the Catholics and to the Anglicans, it's much more meaningful for them because they have much of the dogma of their religion and religiosity that is in these entombments. And I thought it was wonderful because, this is my commercial that tells you that if you have gout, the people who do have gout don't take their medications. Compliance is poor. But here are the list of medications that you can take that so you aren't crippled from it and don't die from it. And they're all written down there, and that's what I share with the fellows in rheumatology when I teach. But I thought it was interesting because it led me to a Matisse line drawing. Matisse did this line drawing of the 14 stations of the cross. Do you all know the 14 stations of the cross? How many of you have Anglican backgrounds that understand that?
Heard of it.
Isn't that interesting, the 14 stations? And each one is a line drawing that Matisse did to put into the chapel of the Rosary, which he built to honor one of the ladies who took care of him as he had his gastrointestinal disease and surgeries. And then she became a nun. So he built this chapel in Vence, France. And this is in that chapel there. Of course, the sisters didn't like it because it wasn't showy enough. It just gave you a line drawing. But if you see the line drawings, you can look at the number and see that number 1 is when he is condemned to death on the lower left. And number 14 is he's laid in his tomb up on the upper right. So if you have a chance when you go to France next time, do visit this chapel that Henri Matisse built just for Sister Jacques. Okay? He designed it to honor his nurse who entered the convent as Sister Jacques. She cared for his GI disorder, which needed multiple surgeries and confined him in bed. And then that led me to think about other people that talk about the approach to the Station of the Cross and to communion and to our beliefs about Jesus, our Lord. And I was introduced by John Welton to Edwina Sandys, who was Winston Churchill's granddaughter. And she grew up in aristocratic England at that time, and she was told who she should marry, or directed to who she should marry. And he became a parliamentarian. They had 2 sons, and she wanted to become a parliamentarian also because she was quite bright. And they said, no, you can't do that. You're supposed to be a dutiful wife. Okay. So she was a self-taught novelist. She wrote novels, and then she became a painter and a sculptor, and then they did divorce, and she came to the United States and married an American and furthered her career here. She had the disease osteoarthritis, and I'm showing you her paintings because she was the one that spoke out for women, having grown up in that very aristocratic, confining society. And that's the controversial sculpture that she did on the left that is called Christa. What do you think of that? What does it make you think of? Any comments?
sort of like Christ as a woman.
Exactly. And that was portrayed and displayed at the Anglican Episcopal Church in New York.
Wow.
And it started so much controversy, because what do you think about women? And what she was trying to say is that women have suffered as much as Jesus. At least that was her thinking of society at that time. And that we have to speak up for women and gender rights. And Jake, do you have any comments?
Well, I was mentioning that there are certain, Jim and I were talking earlier, I was mentioning that there's certain, sort of feminist readings of the cross that play with gender a bit, and the idea that Christ on the cross is, in a sense, broken open to give life to something new. It's like a mother in labor, right? And so I don't want to, sacralize suffering or anything like that, but to say that there might be a way of seeing this in that light as well.
Any other comments? Does it touch you? Does it make you think? Because she was, I'm sorry, somebody?
The word sacrifice is standing out.
Yes, symbolizes the sacrifice of women, and she did that in 1975. But she also did other sculptures in which she emblazoned women. And see this family sculpture that's in the United Nations ground in Geneva, Switzerland, with the family. And she thinks that the Stonehenge should be redone, and all the figures should be women, not men. And there she is now with her book. If you want to buy her book, there's just one book on her. But that's Edwina Sandy, and she's such a nice and charismatic. Have any of you met her or heard of her? Great. So I'm glad to introduce something new to make you think and consider other things. That's Edwina. And then this is a painting of Eve's apple. What does that make you think of?
Forget taking a bite and eat the whole thing.
All right. Any other comments?
Yeah.
So she wrote down here, you only get one bite of the apple. She's talking to the man. You only get one bite of the apple. Make it a good one. So take care of the women in your life. Jake, do you have any comments?
Well, yeah, it's just interesting, there are different ways, I think, of looking at it, and it's very subjective, of course, it's very subjective, but the power dynamics at play there, right? I was mentioning to Jim earlier that in my conservative evangelical upbringing, there's a way of reading that story as a reversal of creation. The serpent tempts the woman, who tempts the man, who tries to become like God, right? And when it's supposed to be top down, God, man, woman, animals. And so the fact that this is kind of an owning of that reversal in some ways is really interesting. Yeah.
Maybe it's the new creation.
Yeah, maybe there's a way of actually owning it as a form of, yeah.
I can tell, I think you'd like to meet Edwina Sandy.
The serpent to shame.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But now we get to the tough one, which is Vincent van Gogh, because as you know, he had many challenges in his life. The first challenge started with his rigid parents. His father was a minister in the Dutch Reformed Church, and he was the number one son. So he was supposed to follow in his father's footsteps. And when he went to theology school, he was not a good student. It wasn't what he really enjoyed. So he started working as an art dealer for a company, and then that didn't work out. He actually took 3 months of training to become a missionary, and he went to the poor part of Belgium, and he was taking care of the poor people there. And his heart was so big that he gave his salary and his clothes to the poor people there. And they said, no, you can't do this. You're supposed to take care of them, but don't overdo it like that. And so the missionary society let him go. Then at age 27, he decided he wanted to be an artist. So for 10 years he painted, and in the last 7 days of his life, he painted one painting every day. 70 paintings in the last 7 days. Because he had what most doctors call manic depressive disease or bipolar disease. And as you know, he tried to start an organization of artists, and he invited Gauguin to come visit him when he was in Arles. And the two of them were going to start this organization, but they got into a fight. And Gauguin said he had this razor, and he threatened me with that razor, and that's when I decided to leave. And when I left, he cut off his ear. So that's the painting of his that I will show you there. Then he was honest enough that he had himself admitted to an asylum because he knew something was wrong. So the message that he's going to leave us is that you have to look above and beyond your fears. So here is his religious training. He is showing Lazarus rising from the dead on the left. And then that's his room that he was put in the asylum. And he painted from the window of his asylum, but he could also go outside and paint. And here are some of his self-portraits, and then the painting of his ear that he had sliced off. There's a little bit of controversy because the painting shows that it's his right ear, but if you read his biography, it says it's his left ear. And I was thinking as a doctor, it would be easy to cut off your left ear better than your right ear if you're right-handed. But again, look at the eyes as he looks out at you. You can see that he's saying, okay, what is life? What does it mean to me in his portraits? And of course, that's his Starry Night. What do you see in Starry Night? That's what he painted from his window when he was in the asylum.
Just chaotic.
Turbulence.
Jake, we had a nice discussion of that. Do you want to?
Yeah, so Van Gogh was actually a fan of Japanese prints. And so if you've ever seen The Great Wave,
Hokusai.
Hokusai's Great Wave, right? There's a similar kind of motif happening here with the turbulence, as someone said, of creation, kind of overwhelming civilization in some way. It's really interesting. You see the steeple of the church mirroring the cypress tree as well, which is interesting kind of thing. Yeah, there's a lot about nature sort of overtaking or returning to some form of like primeval reality. It's really interesting, yeah.
And others have pointed out is that he does have a love of nature also. That's why he got the cypress trees up further so that you could see them. And he has his attribution to the steeple of the church reaching up to the Lord, up to the gods.
And
So-
the combination, forgive me for leaping in, the combination of chaos and order, both at the same time. It's conjunction here.
So did you hear that? It's the combination of chaos and order that you see in this painting. And I think that is absolutely correct. And here are some of the comments that he has as he's painting this. He said, "What I have a terrible need of, shall I say the word, is religion. Then I go out at night to paint the stars." So that was his way. That was his religion. That was his spirituality. But he also said, "I put my heart and soul into my work, and I have lost my mind in the process."
Jim, when did the medical community first uncover this, the bipolar and depressive issue that's been, when did that first?
I think it's a hypothesis because, it's people that, I read articles in which psychiatrists and psychologists have read all of his writings. Because, he wrote letters to his brother Theo who really supported him every day. And he described every painting, what it meant to him and so forth and so on. So they examined all of his, something like hundreds of letters, and then they came up with the diagnosis. So that's where the diagnosis of.
In our modern world though, what did the DSM include? Do you even know that?
Oh no, I'm only an arthritis doctor.
And everything else.
I can't tell you how many of my patients are crazy, but I missed it.
And Jim, also, didn't you mention, I've forgotten this because I read the book many years ago when he wrote it to his brother, but you mentioned, didn't you say he did a painting every day for 17 years?
No, for the last 70 days of his life.
And he did a painting every day?
Yes.
Well, it's a lot of manic activity.
Yes.
That's usually not very normal to paint a painting every day in the last 17 days of his life, but thank God he did.
And as Reverend has told us, there is chaos among organization, right? So here are the blackbirds, and you talked about the ravens today flying over. So when you gave that in your prayer, I thought, does she know my talk already?
That is so funny.
She can really look ahead. Wheat field with crows.
Jim,
Yes.
over here. To me, I see these as supreme beauty, just the heavens, the vast nature of the heavens and beauty. And this reminds me of being in Kansas, and you learn what nature is. And I just wonder, with his gift, if he, there wasn't a forum in which he could be affirmed for his vast depth of feeling.
Yes, I think that's the difficulty, that he never thought he was good enough. And he had trouble selling his paintings, and Theo was a dealer. And it was only after he died, or just before he died, that the reviewers of paintings said, this is really great stuff, just like what you mentioned. But by that time, he felt like he had never satisfied, and he was also anxious about the excellence of his paintings or the goodness of his life. So that's the tragedy that's associated with it.
And now they're worth millions, right? And billions.
So now here's the one that I want to spend the most time on, and I will show you more of his paintings. And that's Paul Klee. He was born in a very musical background with mothers and fathers that were associated with music, and he was so gifted at it that even as a teenager, he was invited to play in the symphony there and in his town. He was so intelligent and learned that he became a professor at the German Bauhaus, and then he moved from there to the Dusseldorf Academy. So he was as high as you could get in his profession in academia, so to speak. But then when he was there, one of the challenges of his life is that the Nazis came into power, and they called his art degenerate, and they destroyed much of his art, and they had him fired. So he had to leave Germany, go back to Switzerland, a broken man, so to speak. And then he developed the disease scleroderma. Now, scleroderma in those days, no one knew how to take care of it. We can now take care of it now, and much of that research is done very well by my friend Dan First and Phil Clements at UCLA, where they have looked very hard at new therapies. But it's such a difficult disease that one of the therapies for scleroderma is human stem cell transplant, where they change your immune system with somebody else's immune system that's there, knocking out your immune system and putting in somebody else's. So that's one of the treatments for severe scleroderma. He died within 5 years after developing this disease because there was no good treatments at that time. But he grew up in life saying that he loves nature, He said different things about life. He was very satirical as a young man, but he did describe that art doesn't reproduce what we can see, but it makes it visible. It should be like a holiday, giving us the opportunity to see things differently and to change our points of view. And so I want to show you some of his paintings. This is how doctors look at them, and they actually score how much hardness of the skin. The autoimmune disease produces fibrosis in all the organs, starting with the skin, but when it gets into the heart and the kidneys and the lungs, which is the most serious thing, then you're going to die, unless you get good therapies. Multiple treatments for the multiple manifestations. Here's his satirical beginnings. He was living in an up county sort of society, and he's saying, here are two gentlemen bowing to one another, each supposing the other is in a higher position. So, and then he went to Tunisia, and though he was a good drawer, he said, for the first time, I'm a painter because I love color. But notice that he puts them all in rectangles. And he's so good putting them in rectangles that could actually put different colors to make your eye follow in each rectangle. And I'll show you a painting of that a little later on. And his central motif was the angels. Do you like that one? What do you see there? He thought the angels were his spirituality, mediators between nature and above. You see the red heart that reflects the angels, benevolent spirit, and that's him being served by the angels with the word clay down below. Isn't that beautiful with the rectangles that enhance it at different sites? And here he's showing that he's walking throughout the world, balancing his musical and his art backgrounds. And he can put colors in such a way that even though he's drawing rectangles, it almost is three-dimensional, where you can see that balloon rising, because he knows how to use the contrivances of different colors. And this is his most famous painting, Ad Parnassum. Each one of those squares is individually painted of a different color in a tessera mood, so it glows a little bit. And at the very end, he put in the black marks that give you the doorway to go through as you walk up to Mount Parnassus, which was the home of Apollo and the Muses. So he's saying in life, we have to walk up to art and use our spirituality to go as high as we can. Do you like that? Ad Parnassus was the name of it.
How many little squares are in there?
I didn't count them, but
Someone must either go across and up.
yes.
Let's get a laugh.
Well, now that you mentioned that, I have a close-up. Well, I'm sorry. This is, it doesn't show you how many, but notice that it says, notice the triangle characterized by variations of tonal graduations applied to each little square defined by a final addition of the black lines that show you that pathway up to the top. And there's the close-up, so you can see each one of those squares. Isn't that amazing?
Do you know how long it took him to paint
Oh, it took
that?
him years, yeah.
It's almost like pointillism in a way. isn't
Yes, it is pointless,
Yeah.
yes.
Squareism. Rectangular.
That's a lot of work, isn't it?
A lot of reasons.
And then when the Nazis confiscated his degenerate art and discharged him, he paints this scholar in 1933 as they took over. And he's saying, what the heck is happening? Why am I discharged? And notice that there's no neck there because his head can just roll off. Then he develops this disease that nobody knew, and he had in the first year, a lot of difficulty. He couldn't work very well. He could only do 25 pieces that first year, but he did 9,000 pieces of work over his life.
And sorry, what was the name of his disease?
The disease is called progressive systemic sclerosis, which we call scleroderma, for those of us that have gray hair. That's the old phrase. Now that's one that I like to show to sort of relieve you of that, because look at morning and also the different squares with just one line that's almost one line continuously, and it shows, right? But look at the one on the right, and I use that as a joke because I would tell people that's called new harmony because now he was beginning to feel better. And so we wanted to get back into painting. So he said, this is my new harmony. And I said, for those of you, I remember giving a talk on this, but for those of you that have IQs over 160, you can see the pattern of the squares there. And I said that once at a meeting, and a little old lady in the back of the room said, I can see the pattern. And I said, what do you see? She said, if you draw a line down the center, take the right side and turn it 180 degrees, it superimposes on the left side, except for the two right in the center. And I said, do you have an IQ higher than 160? And she says, no, but I quilt. So everybody has different skills, right? And we have to use our skills to try and interpret what we're seeing in paintings. Did any of you see that? And he did paint this one that says that the Nazis don't belong there and that the arches of humanity in Germany have to leave. So that was moving of the viaducts. And now he's beginning to talk about his disease. Look at the one on the left. And look at his skin that has tightened up with all this fibrosis. And if you look very closely, you can see that P there and K underneath is the body. Paul Klee, he's describing himself. Stern visage. And he could show himself with the sclerotic hands that happened as a consequence of his scleroderma. And he goes back to the angels. And he's saying, I need the angels to help me. Sometimes they're crying. Sometimes they're praying with me. And sometimes they're helping me look into the future. And he shows himself on the left with just a line drawing showing that he has difficulty swallowing. And that was the criticism, the complaint that he had as he was admitted right before he died to the sanitarium. And he did death and fire here. And again, if you look at his figure there, you can see P for Paul, that's him, right? But those of you that speak German also know that he's spelling the word death, Tod, T-O-D, in that face. So here he is watching the devil stick a pitchfork into his head as he lives on this earth here with the sun up above.
Can we go back to the three angels?
I'm sorry, you want to go back and see the three angels? Yeah, I'm sorry that I can't.
Oh,
Let's see.
on the far right, you see a little smiley face? On the right, at the bottom?
This one?
Yeah.
He just signs his name.
No. Oh.
But notice that he's at the stage where he says, okay, I know what's going to happen. I will go into eternity, and I will show you another painting that illustrates the feeling there.
Let's see. She's looking over her shoulder, and down below is a little smiley face, as if I know it's.
Yes, a little smiling face. You see that, yes. And this is the one that I want you to comment on. What do you see there? It's called Departure of the Adventurer. He's crossing the river Styx,
Yeah.
all right? And that's Paul Klee, and he's waving goodbye to everybody. right? And look at the flag in the back, shows the K for Clay. And then look at the sun up at the upper left. Is smiling. He's ready. He's saying goodbye. Any comments?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I have a background in art history, but I don't remember anything. But just the value, just hitting me now, the value of art for him as an expression of his heart, his soul, his mind, the value, the beauty of art, and to be able to produce it.
Yes.
It was really a gift for him and for us.
Yes, I think of all the paintings I show you this morning, his paintings elicit the most empathy, the most thoughtfulness of our side, not only the sympathy, but the empathy of trying to put ourselves into his footsteps, to understand what he's going through.
Poignancy.
So here is Ruth Asawa. How many of you know about Ruth Asawa?
Yeah, I've seen her things.
So she was born in Norwalk, California at a difficult time because she was one of the 110,000 Japanese that were interned. She lived 4 weeks in a horse's stall at Santa Anita Racetrack before she was sent to Arkansas at the Rower location. When she graduated from high school there, she tried to get into college and no one would accept her, except a small college in Milwaukee that was called the Milwaukee State Teachers College. And they didn't even give her a degree because they said that you cannot find a job, you cannot work. You wanted to be an art teacher, but where can you work? So she went and got additional training at the Black Mountain College in North Carolina, where she met some wonderful artists that had escaped the Nazi rule in Germany and started this art school. And one day when she was there, someone brought her a tumbleweed from Mexico. And she looked at it and she says, "That's beautiful. Let me see if I can reproduce that." And that's when she started doing wire sculpture. So here she is as she's growing up, and you could see her as she, and then when she started the school, she was in Clay's teaching, and so she used many of the same kinds of figures that Clay put together. Those are her classmates on your right. But being of Japanese extent, she married a wonderful classmate, Albert Lanier, and they started a family in San Francisco. And she said, "Family is most important for me." And those are the children that she has in their house in San Francisco. And the girl's name is Aiko Kunio. I will tell you a little bit more about her. But more importantly, she said, "I'm going to work at home. I always want to be with family. That's my first priority, the children, the next generation." So she did all of her work at home. But the first jobs that she got was to do Ghirardelli Square. Do you remember the fountain? How many of you have gone to Ghirardelli Square in the fountain? That was done by her. That's Ruth Asawa. Okay, that was her first big job. And then she did the Hyatt fountains in front of the Hyatt Hotel there. Have you seen, I didn't show that slide, but there are some round fountains that show the scenes, different scenes of San Francisco there. And what she had done is she had gone to the schools to teach art in San Francisco because they had stopped art classes. And she said, "I want my children to have art." So she started art classes at at one public school, and it spread to 40 public schools throughout San Francisco. And she had them do on baker's clay scenes of San Francisco. She put them together, casted them, and made the fountain that's in front of the Hyatt Hotel.
Oh, nice.
Okay. So here is one of her origami fountains, and then that is Andrea, a close-up of the fountain in Giardelli Square. Then she developed one of our diseases called systemic lupus erythematosus. So I gave a talk, more of her disease and more of her, that I don't share with you because it's boring to you, it's medical stuff. I gave it for the American College of Rheumatology opening series, and she's painting herself dying, and the flowers that she wants to commemorate her life. The reason I did it there is because the meeting was in San Francisco, and I wanted to extol and thank the doctors at Kaiser Hospital who took care of her and cured her. So they got around to this, even though she had gone in with kidney disease and looked like she was going to have a death. So those of you that buy stamps may know that in April of 2020, the US government decided that her wire sculpture was indeed worth extolling. And how many of you got those stamps? Ruth the Salva stamps. And I like them, particularly the ones that she did. She did trees of it, she did hanging things with sculptures within sculptures, all with wire thing. On the left is an untitled piece that I think is just beautiful, that I'd love to put on my wall. I went to her house, I examined her, I met Aiko, arranged for that, and then Aiko invited me to her memorial service. So I went there, so I know the family. And I met Aiko when she gave a course on how to do wire sculpture at LACMA. And that's my wire sculpture that she taught me. But that's the most I could do.
How big is that?
Oh, it's just this big, whereas that piece is about this piece. So you can buy some of her work. The last one went for 3.5 million. What?
What do you see in your work? What do you see?
Then I'm not too smart. And there's a picture of her hanging art. But she got so enthralled with teaching the children of San Francisco about the instructions for the rest of their lives that she wrote these comments to teach them. She said, "Who says anymore what can I do for you? Don't compare yourself with others, just yourself. That's all one can ever do. Don't put your sights too low, you might reach them." And she wants you to know that when you put a seed in the ground, it doesn't stop growing. It keeps growing every minute that it's in the earth. We too need to keep growing every moment of every day that we are on this earth. And then she also talked about her interment. She actually has a sculpture that's in San Jose that shows the Japanese entering the train that's taken them to their different places. But she says, "I hold no hostility for what happened. I blame no one. Sometimes good comes through adversity. I would not be who I am today had it not been for the interment, and I like who I am."
Faith.
So then, because of the sermon that we had a couple of weeks ago by Jeffrey Snell, I thought that looking at the next generation enables us to see one other artist that is, if you call his puppets art, and that is Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He was born in Pennsylvania. When he was young, he was obese, and he remembers being chastised by his fellow students for being obese. And that prompted anger in him. And he complained to his mother and father, and they said, no, it's all right, just forget about it and it won't happen again. But that's one of the things that made him write sermons, so to speak, or videos to teach that you have to get down to the level of the child and talk to them at their level. You can be angry. It's all right. It's natural for you to be angry. He did go to Dartmouth for a year, and then he ended up at Rollins College in Florida because he wanted to major in music composition. Then he finished at the Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, where he was ordained. And when he was ordained, the person who ordained him, the minister, said, "Your job is to serve children and families through your work in television." And that's what he accepted. That was his work. That was his command during his ordination. So you know his artistic work. He did Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. How many of you have seen that? Everybody, okay. And he started WQED, which was the first community-sponsored television station to serve the community in education for the children. And he wrote and co-wrote all the music, all the lyrics, and everything that was on television for Mr. Rogers. He did that. That was his artistic stuff.
Jim, I don't know if people here remember, but Fred Rogers was a great friend to WPC.
Tell us about that.
A classmate of Wally Smith, who was the general manager of KUSC here before he went to Long Island. And Fred would always come to worship here. And we'd go out with him for brunch afterwards. And he was so authentic. And one time I remember he had a cold or something, but he didn't want to disappoint the children. So he wore a mask. He'd be certainly at home with all of us here today, to be able to appear and not spread germs or anything with them. But he was giving and caring and authentic.
Thank you very much for sharing that with me. And would you send me a photograph of you and Mr. Rogers so I can put it into the top?
Only if I look young in it.
Come in here.
So I was the director of the preschool the day that Mr. Rogers, Lady Elaine Fairchild, and Mr. McFeely came and sat in the front. And Fred was ill, but he wanted the children to not be disappointed. So the preschool children were all seated here, and one child was in the window of the kitchen at the back, and she was totally bald. And when Mr. Rogers says, "Does anybody have questions?" that child said, she was a 4-year-old in the preschool, she said, "I was in the hospital." And Mr. Rogers paused, and then he said, "Sometimes hard things happen in the hospital." And then she nodded very affirmatively, and I think that was the end of that program. It was quite a day.
Thank you, Dave. That's
It
amazing.
was. And Charles was a roommate of Fred Rogers when they were in seminary.
No,
That's
Wally
how
Smith
he
was. Charles went to San Anselmo,
connected.
but Wally Smith and Fred were.
So was that in 2002 or when was that?
No, I don't remember.
Because he died in
It was in the
2003
1980s.
from his stomach cancer.
Must have been in the
Late
1980s.
90s, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because that makes it so much more meaningful for those of us who belong to this community at Westwood Presbyterian Church.
He was a real believer, too. Really.
So here shows some of his puppets, which to me are very artistic, all right? And the things that he put together. And he would get down below them and stick his hands up with the puppets and manipulate them and talk at the same time. So, I mean, it was quite an enterprise for him to be doing this. It wasn't easy. And here are some of the sayings that he wrote that touched me as I was listening to some of his videos and reading about him. You know, the message that he gave to our children, as Reverend Jeffrey Snell told us, is, I like you just the way you are. You can do this. When I say that it is you I like, I am talking about that part of you that knows that life is far more than anything you can ever see, hear, or touch. And that reminds me of the sermon today, because that was the message there. Sometimes slow is better. Learning to be patient gives greater spirituality. And when he was given one of the large awards, he got up on the stand and he said, take 10 seconds to remember those that have helped you in your life. And then he stopped for 10 seconds. And he said, take 10 seconds to remember and think of the people who have helped you become who you are. The greatest gift you can give is an honest receiving of what a person has to offer with genuine thankfulness. After your honest self-feelings, finding out who you are, learn how to disagree thoughtfully and respectfully. And when people help us feel good about who we are, they are helping us love the meaning of what we create. So I love those sayings from Mr. Rogers. But we have been talking about a difficult time in our lives when we are looking for our journey into eternity. And I have to show you that there are other people that are looking at it too, and this is Picasso's last painting of himself. And notice that it exactly reproduces his photograph. Isn't that amazing how he does that? But I think the take-home lesson from Picasso, re-energize your spirituality of caring by listening, learning, and painting your message as you find your peace, are these which you and I have sent out as Christmas cards and have in our kitchens, right? Because they are what we remember Picasso's message, the bouquet of peace and the dove of peace. And I leave you with the scripture that's at the end there. My little children, let us not love in word nor in tongue, but in action and in truth. So I leave you with that as we summarize what we have gone through today. What do you want to paint and leave for your children? What was your circle of life? So what were the messages by each one of these artists? I put down there the messages that I have learned from them. And you may have different messages, but that's okay. That's what artists do. They're messaging us on the basis of who we are, where we come from, and what we want. What more did you see? What can you share with us and with me? What is your calling, your painting, now that you are free at WPC and family, friends, and the worldwide community? So you can tell I go to the poem session. Thank you very much. Comments now.
Jim, for Van Gogh, when did he do the potato eaters? Because that seems like communion.
Yes, very early in his career, and I think those were the people that stimulated him so much. Those were the Belgian people that were so poor, and he says they're potato eaters, and so it just touched him. And I didn't show that painting, that's right, but that was one of his first paintings that people saw that said this guy really has talent, because you could see the misery, so to speak, and of living so poorly. Any other questions? Okay, now I want you to come up with your lecture next, and it doesn't have to be about art, it can be about literature or theater or movies, but things that make you belong, tell you if you belong, things that make you learn, things that prompt you to gift to the next generation, including your children. Amen. Thank you very much.